All right, let's do this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CGCookie stream. My name is Kent Trammell, and we've got Matthew Muldoon and Jonathan Williamson with us. Today, we pulled a fast one on you guys because originally we had scheduled a demonstration of some 2.8 features, with which Jonathan Williamson is involved directly in the development of that project, and so we were going to get some insider information, so to speak, about some of the features while we were testing out. Yesterday, you were testing out, Jay, and it was completely broken for the Mac side, right?
Yeah, basically, like 2.8 is a massive, massive project, and lots of areas are either being completely rewritten or just dramatically updated, and so just due to the nature of development, it's not quite ready for demo, and like that's going to continuously happen throughout 2.8 is there will be times where everything is broken, and then there'll be times where, everything is basically demo ready. And so, unfortunately, in the time that we had planned to do the stream was when a lot of things were changing and it wasn't in a demoable state. So we will definitely do the stream again. We don't know when yet, but basically when we're back in a good demo state for 2.8, we are going to go ahead and do that stream. But for today, we're not.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's a bummer with the timing, but oh well, what are you going to do? We're still getting used to this live stuff, and well, getting used to it.
Yeah.
But we had this topic about the market on the schedule, and I've been really excited about it. So before we dive in, I wanted to kind of preface the discussion where it came from. So for me, well, let's see, the market's been going on for what, 3 years now? Is that right?
About 3.5.
3.5 years. Yeah. Okay. And it was always a CGCookie project, and I knew that, but I wasn't directly involved. So I don't think I ever got it for the last 3.5 years until this past September. And I was like a spectator, and I guess there's a part of me being a Blender user. I'm assuming most of us go through this kind of idealism wells up about everything that has to do with Blender, that goes into Blender, comes out of Blender, should be free. And so I looked at the market, and I was like, I'm just a little skeptical that it will catch on. I believe in it. I think it's a great idea, but I'm skeptical it'll catch on. And it wasn't until this past September in Geneva when Matthew and Jay were reporting on the market and sharing their vision for where they see it going that all of a sudden it clicked for me. And that's 3.5 years later. And by clicked, I mean the Blender market is in the best interest of the community and Blender itself to exist. And that's when I got it. And that was like, if I missed it for the last 3.5 years fully, surely there's a lot in the community that maybe don't get it either. So that's why I was excited for this topic, really excited to have Matthew and Jonathan on to talk about it. They are the two most involved, aside from Nick, who's the actual web developer. But Jay's doing a lot of that himself. We can maybe talk about that some. But that's kind of setting the stage for why we're having this discussion. It is the Blender market's really an exciting platform for all Blender users, frankly. So first, maybe the least familiar face here is Matthew. I'm not sure, he's never been a part of stream yet until today, but he has. I'm curious about your history with Blender, and then also Blend Swap, and then finally the Blender market. So tell us about yourself, Matthew.
Okay. Hey guys, just want to say hi to everyone. I started using Blender, man, it would be close to 15 years now. I went to college for graphic design. When I got out of school, I got into video production and motion graphics. And I quickly found out working professionally that 3D was becoming the future in motion graphic design. At my first couple ad agencies I worked at, we used 3D Max and a couple other softwares that I don't even remember anymore. And as I started to kind of move around professionally and having to learn, new software, Cinema 4D when it became pretty prevalent, I just kind of got tired of learning new software. And that's kind of when I started looking into an alternative. I took a job at a small shop that didn't have motion graphics really as a position. So I really didn't have any money to spend. And that's really how I found Blender, as being open source and free to everyone. And as I started getting into learning it, and getting into the community, I realized, hey, this is a software. If I learn once, I should be able to take to any job I have in the next, 30, 40 years. And that was, really a game changer for me. And that's kind of when I seriously started to take learning Blender and getting to know it seriously. I mean, to use every day professionally. So as a lot of us, when we start out, come to realize we don't really know anything. So we jump on the forums. Back then, I think it was was the forum Elysium?
Yep.
Something like that. I remember those days, and just kind of digging through the forums and starting to learn the software and starting to get involved in the community. And one way I really learn, the best way that I learn is by actually diving in and doing stuff. So one thing that really intrigued me on the forums was getting to look at other people's files and saying, okay, how'd they do this and how'd they do that, and dissecting it and learning from that. And one thing I found out really quickly was, I think this was right around the time when Elysium was turning into Blender Artist.
Okay.
And one thing that just frustrated me so much was I'd find these amazing projects with links to the files, and all the files were dead. And I was just, this is how I learn, and here's this amazing thing, and yes, that's exactly what I need to learn how to do, and go to download, and we're sorry, the link's missing. Well, wait, now what? And that's kind of how BlendSwap got started. I was so frustrated with seeing, this community that was willing to share their work for everyone to see, which, I mean, really, in being a motion graphic artist and a video editor, you don't see that stuff in other communities, especially 10 years ago. You never saw it. Right. And so here's this Blender community who's like, here's how you do that. Here's the file, have a look. And then not to have that resource, was horrible to me. So luckily, I knew just enough to get myself into trouble and was like, hey, I'm going to start a file sharing website for Blender.
Famous last words.
Famous last words. Yeah. So in 2009, I had to look this up because it was so long ago and I didn't even remember it. I started BlendSwap. And obviously, I don't know how many people know about BlendSwap, but I think it's fairly well known. Through the years, I've had a ton of amazing people help me, with coding BlendSwap and willing to use it and try it and just being awesome. Again, the Blender community is awesome. So yeah, BlendSwap, is BlendSwap. I think that's a whole nother story in itself. And then I think it was about like 5 years ago or so, I started to get to the position where I was using Blender a lot professionally in advertising, in commercial production. And I started realizing that going to BlendSwap and finding models I needed was kind of a pain. They needed a lot of work to clean up, to get ready for animation, to be ready for that professional standpoint where clients are being billed hourly, So, and then I kind of knew just enough to get myself into trouble and think, hey, Blender should have a professional marketplace. And that's kind of when like myself and Jay and Wes all started talking, and, luckily Jay and Wes thought the idea was great, and we kind of decided that let's give it a go and see if it amounts to anything. And I think, I'm super happy on how the market is doing, not only from our standpoint as a company, but seeing creators, create products and get paid monthly, and how much we donate to the Blender Foundation is really, as as a creator and someone who runs the market, and I think you guys can attest too from this CGCookie, seeing people succeed at something that we love is an amazing experience. So so that's kind of in short how we got to here, I guess.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. So what were the first, I imagine the first hurdle you would have crossed was, making money on Blender, and that stigma that maybe that's not moral or something ethical to be doing. So how did you guys go into that?
I think Jay and Wes were a lot more familiar with that aspect than I was.
Sure.
Well, I mean, I have a fairly straightforward answer to it, and it kind of depends on how you ask the question. As far as how you make money with Blender becomes kind of the sticking point for a lot of people. But my answer, in almost all cases, if somebody says that you shouldn't be making money doing this or that with Blender, the response in my mind is simply, so are you telling me that my time or your time is not valuable?
Yeah.
It's one thing if you want to donate your time, by all means. That's your choice, and more power to you. We could all stand to, have a little bit more time donated probably, and to do more things just for the love of it. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to make a living as a professional artist, as a developer, as, in any kind of position, at the end of the day, your time is your single most valuable asset, no matter what you do.
Right.
And so if you want to succeed as a professional in Blender, and particularly if you want to succeed as an independent professional that's not, say, a part of a large game development company or a large film studio, but specifically as an individual, your time is the most valuable asset you have. And so if you want to tell me that my time in Blender is not, allowed to be sold effectively, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you you're nuts and go away.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So before maybe we get into, because I'd love to talk about the donation and where that kind of stuff came from, I was thinking it'd be cool if you guys pitched me on the market as if I'm a creator interested in it. So how would you do that?
Go for it, Matthew.
Oh boy, the elevator.
On the spot.
Okay, here we go.
You got this.
The Blender market was set up to allow individual artists and developers to a place to succeed, a place to start making money from their hobby or their passion. And essentially, in running websites commercially in the Blender universe, we felt that we were best suited to help the artists and the developers to do that. And that's essentially what the Blender market is a framework for artists and developers working with Blender to succeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's simple.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's it.
Done.
Done. Yeah, absolutely. That's when it clicked for me in Geneva, was realizing, I guess I compared it to a YouTube or an Etsy, where if before those existed, I never could have put a video and had a hope that people would see it on the internet. Maybe not even a place to host a video in the first place, but then to be exposed to an audience. Without YouTube as a platform, that couldn't have been done before. And then Etsy, for my grandmother to make all these knitted scarves for people other than her family members, without an Etsy, that would be very difficult. And so that's when it clicked for me what the Blender market is. It clicked for me so much, I'm like, man, I should be doing this in my free time. I need to create a storefront for myself. But
do it.
I agree.
So then the donation part of it, because that was kind of left out of the pitch in a way. Sure. You mentioned the developers, but that's what's so cool about the market. You're one of the biggest, if not the biggest, donators to the development fund, correct?
Yeah, I think at this point, the Blender market is the largest consistent donation source. Right. There's the Blender Development Fund has a lot of individual contributors, doing everything from 5 to 100 euros a month or whatever. There's, large donations from Epic Games and Valve and other studios that will do a lump sum donation frequently. But as far as on a ongoing basis, I think that it is the largest at this point. And
yeah. Cool. And I guess just to clarify that's not us.
True. Right. It's the member. Right?
That's our individual artists and developers that are donating that. Yeah. And that's something I don't want to get lost in, the Blender market. No.
True.
These are individual men and women who are donating back to the software that we all love.
Yeah. I think it's a really important distinction because, all we are doing is facilitating people to contribute back to Blender. Because I think the donation aspect, which I still think is one of the coolest parts of the entire marketplace, was one, it was actually I don't know if you guys remember, but it was actually a random idea from Kyle Unziker, who was the original graphic designer for the marketplace. And this was basically during our kickoff sprint in Colorado where we got the team together. We were working on basically designing the first pass on the market. We hadn't actually started building anything yet. We just knew what we were doing, but that was it. And I don't remember how it came up in discussion, but basically we were standing around the table and Kyle was like, well, what if you just allowed people to donate a portion of their sales to the development fund?
Yeah.
And
I remember our...
Instant, we have to do that.
Because we were like, oh my God, that is the greatest idea.
Right.
Yeah, I remember it distinctively as... For me, that was that's the viable reason why this market will work.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that, kind of going back to your original kind of question there, Kent, as far as the donation being such an important aspect of it is, that's beyond a artist's ability to succeed. The other aspect of the Blender market is for Blender to succeed. Basically what we're trying to do with the market is say, hey, we want all of you, the customers, the artists, the developers, the sellers, everybody to take a vested interest in Blender's future success. And one of the ways we do that is ensure that there is continued funding for development efforts, because most of the developers that work on Blender, including those working on 2.8, are doing it either on a volunteer basis or are paid via grants out of the Blender Development Fund. That's the vast majority of development. Now, there's some additional development that happens in many other ways, but that's where the bulk of it comes from. And so every time that you purchase something that donates to the development fund, every time you sell something with a portion of your earnings going to the development fund, you're taking a vested interest in Blender's future success. And, as a tool that has enabled all of us to basically create and make a name for ourselves with no licensing cost for free and to become a part of the community, that's pretty awesome. There's not very many other professional tools that is truly the tool, not just a piece of a pipeline that you can use for free anywhere in any capacity for, without paying a cent.
Right.
And so if, us taking an investment in its future is valuable for everybody.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's say I'm sold on the idea and when I mentioned that I had the thought, maybe I should do this in my free time, why not? I'm going to take that approach and let's say that I realize that I've got modeling skills. I can create shaders and I do a little bit of scripting on the side, when I feel the need. What would you recommend? How to be successful, how to get into the market, how to start creating products, which products to create, to focus on, and then do I just put them up there and let them go and hope the sales come in and donations fly?
Matthew, why don't I answer the first part and you take the second part?
Okay.
The first part, the single easiest way to basically create a product that is actually going to be useful to people is solve your own problem.
Okay.
So I know, Kent, you do a lot of within your own personal time, you're doing a lot of architectural designs as, as you were renovating your house, using Blender to design kitchen, bathroom, you name it.
Right.
Think of all of those, all of the processes during that project that could have been improved by, whether it's having, a set of different trim shapes that you can quickly just use, prefabs to drop into the scene, whether it is, an easy way to manipulate furniture scale, if it's, whatever it may be, whether it's an asset, a tool, you name it, what is something that would have made that process faster, more and more productive. Now, granted, like this is a hobbyist project for you at that point, so it's not like, sometimes it's a little harder to turn that into a actual, say, product.
Okay.
But sometimes those are also the easiest ones because they're the ones that you're like, oh, you know what? I don't really care if I take 5 hours and write this little script and then automate this later.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to do that if you're on the clock. But
Right.
when you're doing it on your own time, sweet.
Oh,
Because, most products that do really well are those that solve a real problem.
Right.
And even though we all like to think that we're good at it, it's actually really hard to solve a problem you're not comfortable with or like aren't intimately familiar with.
Mhm.
And so like if you're kind of in that mindset of, I need to build a product, I don't really know what problem to solve, what do I do? That's not actually a really difficult question to answer because it's kind of like, actually I see this come up a lot on like there's an entrepreneurship subreddit
Mm-hmm.
and constantly there's people asking questions like, oh, what could I sell? What business could I build? I'm like, I mean, yes, you can do that, but why don't you solve your own problem?
Right.
Do something that is intimately familiar to you.
Okay. That's actually
So
really helpful because I don't know if you just pulled that out of your sleeve, but like just that example of like me using Blender to create or to aid in my remodeling stuff. Oh man, add-ons can come out of that. Model like you said, trim pieces, hardware. These things can easily be duplicated and used in a bunch of scenes. Shaders,
absolutely.
yeah. Oh my word,
Think
tons of
of
things.
all your shaders just for doing like furniture hardware.
Right.
All your doorknobs, your handles, your hinges, all of those kinds of things. Are they in brass? Are they in shiny nickel?
Yeah.
Are they in brushed nickel? Are they whatever?
Oh yeah.
Suddenly, those are all shaders that everybody in that exact scenario and others would suddenly be using.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
actually, a very, very good example on the Blender market today of somebody doing exactly that, and I've used these guys as examples before because it's still like the best example I think we have on the market, is Cogumilo Softworks. They have 3
Right.
products. They have Bake Tool, Motion Tool, and B2U. And each one of these are tools that they have built for their own internal pipeline to solve their own problems. And then they develop them in the sense that, or in a way that then is able to be applied to other people's workflows and make them generic enough. And it just works. And there's a reason that they're still continuously one of the top sellers on the market.
Wow. Okay. So we got a question here real quick. Actually, this is from Gonzo. He works with us. What are the most commonly requested products and or the best-selling categories?
As far as requested, I don't know if I know that right off top. As you get into the best-selling product / categories, add-ons are obviously huge.
Okay.
They're probably, unless something's changed, the number one category.
Okay.
Shaders are also a big sell. We've seen a somewhat of a drop in that since the principled shader came out.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then also the one that really catches me, and Jay might have different thoughts on this, is dude, nature stuff just sells like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
And we have a ton of amazing stuff, and it just sells and sells and sells and sells.
Well, but it makes sense when you think about it because, one of the problems with models, number one, it's the lowest barrier of entry as far as making a reasonably high quality model that is then reusable is, well, not easy. It's not difficult. It doesn't have the barrier to entry that, say, writing add-ons does, or the attention to detail that maybe shaders require and whatnot. The problem with most models, though, is they tend to have a one-time use case.
Yep.
Like if you have a really specific model or a really stylized model, every now and then you might find somebody that happens to be in the right situation where they need, that fantasy dragon or whatever, and that dragon fits their existing style. But they don't have a lot of reusability.
Okay.
And so where then nature assets come in and that are really, really successful, particularly more realistic nature packs. They don't have to be photorealistic, but more realistically styled, is anybody doing an outdoor scene needs nature. And be that in games, be that architecture, be that, just overall renders,
Right.
Everybody needs them. If you look at like Andrew Price's Pro Skies, while that's not a nature pack per se, it's in the same direction of everybody needs skies for their outdoor scenes.
Right.
It does incredibly well. Everybody doing an outdoor scene needs trees, grass, bushes, and particularly those things are not that easy to create. And so if you can just say buy a pack for $50, $100 or whatever, and that gives you 50 different assets that all look good together, but that are also unique enough that it's not abundantly clear that, hey, you just use that nature pack.
Right. Right.
Suddenly, like they have very, very good reusability.
Yeah, that makes total sense. A quick question in the chat, which, by the way, I usually try and start every stream this way, but this is your chance to ask questions. This is part of the big reason why we do this in the first place. But if you have questions for Matthew or Jonathan, please let it rip in the chat. And if you're on YouTube, the chat's not available there. Look in the description, click on that link, and the chat will be available on our actual site. So a question here from Sabi404. If I create a rigged character in Blender, would it be a good idea to upload that to the market so people can use it for animation?
As long as it's somewhat generic. Characters, Artel, who is a creator on the market, does amazing characters, and he does well. So, and I think there's always a use for good models, especially characters. When I worked in advertising, I don't know how many times my boss would come in and say, "Hey, can we do an animated guy?" And as a lot of people know, that's not the easiest thing to create, rig, and working well.
Yeah.
So from a professional standpoint, if I could say, hey, I can spend 10 hours trying to do this myself, or I could go over here and spend $100 or whatever, $50. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So, definitely if the rigging and the character stuff is something you like and it's good and you're good at it, I mean, try. The worst thing I'm going to say is, hey, I don't think this is ready. I'm going to give you a bunch of pointers on what to fix. And then you go and fix it and come back, in a month when you've fixed all the concerns and we put it up on the site.
Right.
Well, and the other thing I'd add to that too is the key there is the generic aspect of it. To use Artel as the example again, Artel has two character rigs on the market, the Anna and Kevin rig, and they both actually do quite well because they're generic, they're well made. They wouldn't look out of place in just about any kind of stylized animation. And so, when you need that kind of thing, it works really well. Now, had Artel instead designed a really stylistic, knight or hero character, it's just not going to have the appeal that a generic character does because its use cases are slim to none compared to a generic character. Does that mean that we want, hundreds and hundreds of generic characters on the market? Not necessarily. But when it's well made and it can apply to a lot of different scenarios, that makes it really, really valuable.
Definitely. Yep.
And I mean, actually, Gonzo mentioned a point. Jonathan Gonzalez, who is our Unity instructor here on CGCookie, made a comment in the chat that he would love to see more game-ready characters. And that is actually something that we basically don't have on the market right now, is well-rigged, well-made, low-poly game characters.
Nice. Yeah.
Particularly, one of the things that gets missed a lot with character rigs is a lot of people will like to create a kind of an optimized mesh and then rig it and it'll look really great and then they'll call it game ready. And sorry, those don't mean the same thing. Game ready means it needs to be able to import into Unity or Unreal, work one-to-one with their humanoid systems, and run smoothly, which means you've got to have minimal bone counts. You can't use a lot of constraints. You can't use a lot of shape keys. Are there technically ways to use shape keys and things like that in Unreal and Unity? Absolutely. But are they going to be a drag and drop import? No, not so much.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the stuff that we would love to see more of because it's super vital. But again, needs to be generic.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that also, low poly does not mean game ready. They are not.
No, it does not.
So you're kind of hitting on something, the review process. I'm interested in what that's like. I've done some reviews, so full disclaimer, but like, what does that look like from the market standpoint?
So, and I'll kind of toot my own horn. I think I'm kind of uniquely qualified in running blend swap for what, 18 years now.
Right.
I've reviewed.
You can't count.
Is it 8?
No, 8. So
Oh, I thought you said 18. It was like,
I might have said 18.
Tooting pretty hard.
I've looked at a lot of models. I've reviewed a lot of models. So typically what happens is when a creator uploads their first product, we put it through its paces. I think one of the big things that separates the Blender market from any other 3D marketplace is all of our products are quality checked. And we don't charge an extra percentage fee from our creators because of that. We want to make sure that the stuff that's on the market is of the highest quality that we can. So when a creator uploads a product, we test it. I test it. If I'm not good at a lot of things, I send it on to either you, Kent, or Lampel, or Jonathan, and our team tests it. And not only do we test it, but we give advice. The fundamental core in the Blender community is kind of this helpfulness that, almost everyone seems to have. And again, going back to kind of our key reason for making the market is we want you guys to succeed. So when we review your stuff, we're not going to be like, this sucks. You need to go to school or something. It's, hey, here are the problems. Here are some suggestions how we think you can make this better. Add this, remove this. You need to work on your texturing, your rigging, so on and so forth. So we're looking to put you into a place where you can succeed. And I've gone back and forth half a dozen, dozens of times with creators to get their product in the place where I think it's ready for the market.
Yeah.
That's again, we don't succeed if our creators don't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So
you bring up something you hit on is initially when I think of like the Blender market, I have the inclination of being like, I've got a backlog of random models that I've created. Like, shoot, just throw them up on the market. Maybe I'll get lucky and one will sell. And I throw them up there and just let it sit. But like you said, I think if you really take time to invest in it and think through your product, that's how you're going to succeed compared to just tossing stuff up and hoping for the best. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think you can even take that a step further. If you create amazing stuff and put it on the market, we're going to advertise it for you. We'll post it on our Twitter, on our Facebook. We will get it in front of customers. And you can go about that way. Or if you're really serious about turning your Blender hobby or obsession into a job, you can do all the things that all the other successful people before us have done, like Andrew Price and Steve Lund and Gleb and all these guys. They start a community behind their brand. Mm-hmm. And then as they gain trust and exposure, then they start selling things. Mm-hmm. And by going that route, you're gonna sell more. You'll have a following that is excited about you, that trusts you, which is huge. And once you get to that point where you're like, hey, I made this pack of models, what do you guys think? You already have this base of customers that might not even know they're customers yet. Mm-hmm. So I think the market is really special where, you get out of it what you put in.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of make some pocket change, we have creators that do that, and they make great products and they make some pocket change. Mm-hmm. And if you want to really make it, a career out of this, there's people on the market that are doing that also.
Holy cow. Seriously, there's people making equivalent of a full income. Like, would you say that at this point?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Wow. And that the percentage of people that are either making a livable income or getting closer and closer to it continues to go up every single month. I mean, at this point in time, we're paying well over 150 different people every single month for their sales. And that number is basically going up by 10 to 15 every single month.
That's so awesome.
Because one of the things that the market does, and that has kind of always been one of the value propositions, for using a phrase, is we give you an audience. There are certain people, if you've built up a good following and you start selling, you're going to be successful almost no matter what, so long as you continue to working at it. But one of the problems that a lot of people run into is building a following is actually really damn hard, and it's also not what everybody wants to do. Not everybody wants to try and build a personal brand behind themselves as an artist or a creator, right or wrong. It's a lot of work. And so, if you are somebody that just makes really, really good tools, but you don't have that following, maybe you've been working behind the scenes in a production studio for the last 15 years and then suddenly realize, I really, really like Blender and I really like this open community. I want to start selling something. Mm-hmm. How are you going to build up that following?
Yeah.
It's challenging. And so that's part of the market is we have the marketplace effect. By the very nature of being on the market, you're able to get a lot more exposure than you would if you were just say put up a WordPress store and started selling your Blender tools. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that you can't do that. Frankly, that's how basically all of us got started. Mm-hmm. Speaking for myself, I absolutely just started bit by bit. I'd release a tutorial. That one would get a few views, and then I'd release another one, and that one would get a few more views.
Right.
But it's a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on the market, you can get a lot more exposure for it.
Right.
And as long as it continues to succeed, as long as we continue to do our job and the market continues to do well, the ability to get noticed on things like that is just going to go up.
Right. Right. Let's take a couple minutes. We've got some questions here. I want to knock those out before they get lost. So one from Pierico, do you plan to link Dropbox to the market to unify with other web stores?
We would like to. Okay. Particularly for Pierico, you and several of the other creators that are doing training, have a real big issue of your files are really big. And, that's, of course, normal and expected and good because we want high-quality video. But it does make uploading challenging. We absolutely want to link Dropbox. We haven't yet looked at what's technically required to do it. We've got some higher priority issues to solve first, but yeah, it's on the list.
Okay. Yep. And then the last part of his question was, do you plan to allow streaming? I think he's asking to host streaming channels on the market. Is that, I think, what he means? That's crazy.
If you do indeed mean to stream through your Blender Market account, no.
Okay.
There are plenty of systems out there that do that really, really well, and I don't think it would make sense for us at this point to go down that route because we're a very small team and our resources are really quite limited. Now, the one thing I would add to that, though, is we could absolutely expand, for example, the shop pages to allow you to embed a YouTube channel or something like that. So then if you're streaming through YouTube, it could just automatically show up on your video. Oh, Pierico's, I believe he just clarified to say allow streaming of videos for training, almost like CGCookie sense, where you would log it. In that, yes, okay. Probably. Basically, the ability to purchase a course and stream it on the Blender Market, I think, is a very valuable end goal. Training has become a larger and larger portion of the market. It's still a very small portion of overall sales, but it's clearly making an impact, and we want to make that better.
Okay. Another one from N647. Would the market work for 3D print ready models?
Traditionally, it's a hard category to sell. I think there's maybe one or two models on the site right now that are considered print ready. But again, print ready stuff is usually so specific that it doesn't really have the demand that that we like to see on the market.
Right.
Also along with that, a lot, there's Shapeways and kind of all those companies that do printing amazingly well, I would think that those would be a better choice for your products than the Blender market.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, another question from Nick. Just Nick, forget the numbers. I love some of the Weta research. I've never read any of it. What is your opinion based on being inspired but not copying tool workflows?
That's always a hard one. I mean, I can speak from experience here that, like, when we first designed Retopoflow, one of the very first tools that we built was contours. And in fact, it was actually designed as contours initially. And I got a lot of flack in the beginning because, unbeknownst to me, turns out that Modo and I think one other package had almost an identical tool. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I had seen that tool in Modo beforehand. I don't know if I had just seen it offhand and then later I'd been thinking about a project I was working on and thought, oh man, this would be so nice if we had a tool that did this.
Yeah.
I don't know at this point. I don't know which came first.
Right.
I can tell you that when we were building the tool, I don't own a copy of Modo. I've never purchased one. I don't even have it installed on my machine. And so there was no, hey, how does it work here? Okay, cool. Let's do it that way. That simply wasn't the case. But I think with any tool that you're building, there is, of course, a fine line between copying and being inspired.
For artists even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that there's a good answer to it other than, try and take your own approach to it. If you see something that's done really, really well in another tool, great, by all means, implement it. But at least be honest in your implementation. If you copy a tool from another package and build it into an add-on, flat out say it. Say, you know what, we built this because we were inspired by this tool.
Right.
Obviously, if you do that, be certain that you can legally do it. Although it's very tricky, there are some tools that are copyrighted, basically, or patent protected, and that becomes a very, very different scenario. But let's assume that, these are widely available that are not patented, and they're just, general tools out there. One of the things that we see, and personally, I don't think I would worry about it that much, if anything, because through all software packages, particularly creative ones, be that painting tools, drawing tools, 3D tools, you name it, they all tend to kind of converge after a certain point because as artists, we discover, you know what, this paintbrush tool, this thing's really nice. Wouldn't it be sweet if, brushes had the ability to mimic pressure and then they had the ability to mimic tilt, or we have applied texture to it. Suddenly you discover there's not necessarily anything original like this, and basically every system has implemented it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so, and just to add a little, I see it a little differently than Jay does. I think if you're looking at someone else's code or someone else's add-on and you're duping that within the community, yeah, that I don't feel that's cool. But if you look at Cinema 4D and you're like, hey, this feature is amazing and we don't have that in Blender, I say do it. I don't think in my head, that's not copying in the sense that I think the copying with the evil, laugh behind it.
Yeah.
It's bringing a function. It's bringing a function that Blender doesn't have and adding it into Blender.
Right.
I can think of a dozen things that I'd like to see added to Blender that other software has that we just don't have. And I'd love it if people would, create that stuff. Everyone's got a tree generator. I mean, every software, when you get down to it, they all have, they all have the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's the different keys that you're pressing or the different UI,
Yeah, you're right.
I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah, I tend to align there. I've never really thought of the ethics of copying an idea that someone else had, like the way a feature functions. But I've never thought of that as actually copying for some reason, but I'm not a developer.
Well, and at the end of the day, execution is so much more important than the idea.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
And that applies to everything.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, sorry. A couple more questions. This one is from Sephiroth himself. Any plans to maybe add an add-on for connecting Blender with the store. So maybe you could browse options or store items, maybe buy and import the model directly into Blender. That's the question.
There's ideas on doing that. We basically understand what needs to happen, and we have, the team to do it. It's not an easy process. Probably what will actually happen is that basically after 2.8 is released, we will take advantage of some of those aspects and do exactly that. Main reason that 2.8 is building what's known as an asset engine, and the asset engine basically enables you to build I have it backwards. It's basically building an asset system, which then you can write engines on top of it to then manage your assets however you choose. And so what we would effectively be able to do is to build a Blender Market engine that then would be able to authenticate with your account, bring in the models, bring in the add-ons, et cetera, and you would then have instant access. Absolutely want it to happen. There's a lot of open questions as to how to make it happen. There's a lot of, just as an example, let's say that we built it tomorrow and it worked. Well, then we have to make sure that all creators basically make their products import ready. In that we would suddenly have to define standards as far as, cool, this is how your add-on has to be structured to make sure that the engine can read the properties, that it can check the version updates, that it can, authenticate with your account, like to do all of those things that would require to make sure that the end user who has no, exposure to any of the back end, that when they purchase something, they can just click, cool, add to scene.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that it's one thing if you're doing that with your own products and you're managing the entire system. But for us, we would be then having to coordinate hundreds of products or thousands of products and make sure they're all ready. So that it's a goal, but it is tricky.
Right. Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, question from Mason. What method of payment transaction do you use to pay the vendors?
PayPal. Right now, it's strictly PayPal. We used to do Bitcoin. We stopped doing Bitcoin because of fees became an issue for lower dollar payments. For high earning creators, we will do it manually, but you basically need to be earning $500 or more per month for us to warrant doing it manually, because it starts to stack up time quickly. So right now it is only PayPal. We hope in the future to enable bank and debit card payouts, but we are waiting on some functionality to be added by our payment processor to actually enable that. So that's an unknown release date.
Okay. All right. Another question from Char Hunter. Are taxes factored into the sale of products?
There are no taxes on the products.
Okay.
Nope.
All right. Another one. Sorry, we've got an active chat, which is awesome.
Yeah.
A bunch of questions. From Cart Toefel. When would you say my skills can make market-ready content? Is it completing most online tutorials on a subject and to have enough knowledge? If not, is there an effective way to learn even more than pure practice?
Practice is the single best thing that anybody can do. So I'm going to tell you, no, you just practice and practice and practice. Mm-hmm. What I would also say is, if you're unsure of if your skills are basically, up to par for the market, just ask us. By all means, reach out and just say, hey, I'm interested in selling on the market. Would you be willing to check out my portfolio? And we'll look.
I'm going to stick something in there even before you get to that point. I think an even better precursor before you contact. Granted, I don't want to make it seem like I don't want anyone to contact me. You can contact me. I'll give you my phone number. You can call me. But just go to the market and look at the products that are in the area you would like to create in, and see if you're on par or above those products.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Particularly because, one of the things that we will continuously keep doing on the market, like Matthew mentioned earlier, every product is reviewed, and, we try and set a pretty high bar. And frankly, that bar is not going to go lower. That bar is going to continue going up. We would always like to have fewer high quality products than more lower quality products.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if you're unsure if the quality is the same, then shoot me a message. I will let you know.
Certainly.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I think also that, that's one other thing just to add to that too is, if you contact us and basically we reject your portfolio, take that as motivation because, like Matthew said earlier, we're not rejecting people just because we want to reject you. Like, hey, our business succeeds when you succeed on the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will be very honest in the reviews. We'll give you real feedback and ideally specific feedback such that you actually know where to improve. But so if we reject you, it's not a hit against your ego.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It's not.
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay, I've seen 2 more questions and then no more. So this one was this is from Pierco again. He says he has some of these answers from Slack, but he's asking about the statistics we're planning to share as far as sales over calendar selection, sales over whole market, etc. Do you know what he means?
Sure. Basically right now we're mostly an open book as far as numbers go. We're happy to share whatever we can. There is a public page. If you go to theblendermarket.com, there's a page right at the top of the navigation called Market Statistics, which will give us the overall numbers. If somebody is looking for specific numbers, say like, hey, how much did you sell in, third quarter of 28 or 2017 or, whatever you're interested in, you can ask us and we'll probably tell you. Obviously certain numbers are private. We won't tell you what other creators earned. We won't tell you, those kinds of things. But so far as general public numbers, by all means. And mostly it's, we have to be careful with the numbers only because it's very easy to share too much and suddenly nothing is helpful. So at the end of the day, if you've got a number that you're curious of, just ask us and we'll probably tell you.
Nice. Simple enough. Okay, a couple more questions that have come up. Windex, how are prices set?
By you. Ultimately, our creators set the price that they want to set. Again, the great thing about the market is that we're here as your support. So we've had lots of creators say, hey, here's this add-on, here's this model. I have no idea, what I should charge for it. Not a problem. We can look at it and we can evaluate it and give you an idea, but you don't have to take that. If you're like, man, that's way too low, I'm going to sell it for $50. Awesome. It's up to you about what you want to create and how much you want to sell it for. But if you ever need help, we're just, essentially an email away from giving you our thoughts on it. Also, with a lot of these questions on what should I make and what should I price it and how do I go about that, go to the blog on the market. It's got a ton of articles on, just the business of selling Blender products and how to go about it. So if anyone's like super curious on stuff, I'd suggest popping over to our blog and looking through, the posts there, because a lot of those things we've already answered and we'll continue to answer and elaborate on more in the future. So,
yeah. I think the one thing that I would add on the price too is, anytime somebody submits something, they actually set the price before they submit it to us. Now, not necessarily as like the hard-coded price, but like you physically have to set a price before you can submit the form. And, if somebody submits something and we think the price is just obscene, either obscenely cheap or obscenely expensive, we'll tell you. And, and this actually happens quite often. Somebody will submit something for like $2.99 that's a $60 product, and we'll flat out tell you, you should raise this price. At the end of the day, it's going to be your choice. We only have basically one pricing restriction, which is that it has to be more than 50 cents. And that's actually a technical limitation through our payment processor that we can't do less than that. But beyond that, it is ultimately up to you. But we will give you our honest input as to, hey, you should reevaluate this price.
Yep.
Right. Okay, a couple more questions from Chris Rupp, or one of them's from him. Can you sell products in the market and on other stores, like simultaneously on the Unity Asset Store, or is it exclusive commissions?
Again, a great thing about the Blender market is we don't have all the restrictions of other 3D markets. We're not like another big marketplace that, I won't name names, but I think we all know who we're talking about, that, will give you 10% more on your sales if you only sell with them. We don't do that. We have a ton of creators that on the site right now that sell through us, that sell on their own website, and that sell on the Unity store. And you know what? Again, my main goal as an employee of the marketplace is I want you guys to succeed. And that's why we don't pigeonhole you with anything like that. You sell with us, you sell with Unity, sell by yourself. It doesn't matter to us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We have no desire to add exclusive agreements or anything like that. That's simply not what we want to do. What we want to see happen is we want the Blender ecosystem to continue to succeed and thrive. I've been a bit more outspoken in the last year or so, and I hope to continue being more outspoken that we want to see more Blender businesses. Both as individuals, as teams, as actual companies, more businesses actually making a living with Blender for Blender. And a part of that is making sure that the ecosystem continues to succeed. And having an exclusive agreement does not further that ecosystem. Instead, that just furthers our business and makes it more restrictive. And the last thing we want to, tell a startup creator that's just now kind of getting their foot in the door and experimenting with it, we don't want to put restrictions on them.
Yeah. And we're not going to take 80% of your profits either. That's not what we're about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple more questions. These are kind of hitting on the same topic, but if a vendor makes a good profit on a product, do they ever raise the price? Is question number one. Question number two is someone has had I lost it. 1 second. Had the idea where the price is low at first, and then after so many downloads, it raises. Any input on this, like that concept?
I guess the answer to the first part, yes, absolutely. People raise prices. You can, as a creator, you can change the price at any time on your product. One of the things that a lot of people will do is they will release the product at a discounted rate initially, and then say, hey, the 25% discount ends in 1 week, and then the price will go up. Or somebody will, they'll release version 1 of a product, they'll sell for a year at a certain price, and then they put a lot of work into the next version, and thus they raise the price when that one is released. It's totally up to them. As far as the tiered pricing based on downloads, I would caution that approach because you are effectively punishing your customers for success, for your own success, and that is a very can very quickly become a negative approach where suddenly people are like, oh, well, I don't want to buy this, because then you're just going to raise your prices once it reaches further.
True. What
you might, a way to flip that around would say, raise your price as your costs go up. If you have a product that requires a lot of customer support and suddenly you are off doing a lot of support every single day and you're not able to keep up, well, maybe you need to raise the price at that point. Don't base the price just based on the number of sales you have.
Yeah, and it gets slippery is once you have sales and have customers. We see it a lot the other way too. I see a lot of products come onto the market initially at a high price point for a month or two when there's no sales, and then they decide to drop it, and maybe then they get sales. Now, where it all starts to get murky, like Jay said, is once you have sales. It's tough to go to a customer and say, hey, thanks for buying this for $60, but now it's 40. Mm-hmm. There are ways that you can kind of negate some of those hard feelings with discounts or other things that you can do on the market. But as far as, I would say I probably see more people coming in high initially, not selling anything and then changing the price. But like anything on the market, you can change anything at any time that you want. So
yeah. Okay. This is a question from Mason. It's a detailed one. So let me try and read this to you clearly. He's asking what would sell better in terms of models, focusing on clean, flexible geometry for animation, or displacement, or models that focus more on silhouette with baked details, distinctly environment assets. So like, sorry, it's kind of, I'm trying to make sense of it in small terms. Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Mason, you do phenomenal work and I'm very familiar with what you do. I'm not going to give you a specific answer to it because without diving into the actual sales number and carefully like analyzing which ones represent which of the categories you kind of referenced. Instead, I would say kind of going back to the original point I made about solving your own problems is focus on those assets that you would use in your scenes on a regular basis and not hero assets. Focus on those assets that populate a scene, so actually, for example, let's take one of your actual renders. You did a render, I believe, and I'm pretty sure this was you where you had basically a large tree on a hill with a swing on it and a character, and then lots of grass and maybe there wasn't a swing on the hill, but the tree was absolutely the focal point of the scene. That wouldn't necessarily make a great product because it's such a defined, distinct element. Mm-hmm. But what makes really, really good reusable assets is think about all the different grasses that are in that scene. Think about the fence post, the logs that are lying on the ground, all the rocks along the path, the gravel, all of these less focal elements, but that everybody needs when they're making those kinds of scenes. Because for one, for example, if you were to remake that scene, if you could put all of your time and energy into the focal point and then just populate the rest of the scene with high quality assets that you purchased, you'd be able to save an immense amount of time while still focusing on the things that actually make that piece a selling point.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's really kind of the grunt work that sells really well. The stuff that you can spend literally hundreds of hours on is kind of the stuff I want to spend $50 on and just throw it in my scene and be done with it and save myself hundreds of hours, So it's really kind of that, and it's so counterintuitive, but it's kind of that stuff that, isn't really focused on a lot,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. As a modeler, I want to think I'll make the coolest character, super interesting design and all this stuff and sell it. But if one person buys it and uses it in their short, no one else can use that again. Or they'd be stupid to use it again. And in that sense, it's kind of a battle that I face as a modeler too. Okay, a couple more questions for you. Let's see here. Okay, from Scott McClellan, this is an easy one to answer. Looking toward Blender development, is it possible to delegate part of one's commission toward donation to Blender? Yes, that's built in directly. We were talking about that a little bit earlier, but that's a crucial part of the Blender economy, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, basically the way that it works, Scott, is literally you will go in when you are creating your product. It's done on a product-by-product basis. You will have a slider that just says what percentage of your earnings would you like to contribute to Blender development? And you can go all the way up to 100% of your earning or as low as 1%. And the rest is handled for you. We will then, every single month, we will calculate all of your sales and the portion of which you are donating at the time of purchase, so you can change it at any point. And then we will send that off to the Blender Development Fund once a month and go from there. In fact, actually, if you look at the Blender market right now, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a heart and a dollar amount. Right now, I think as of today, it's $1,400. And those are the proceeds being donated by creators on the market to the Blender Development Fund in November. And so, yeah, you can absolutely be a part of that.
That's so cool. All right, a couple more questions. We're a little over the hour time frame, but if you have any last-minute questions, please toss them in the chat and we'll answer them, but probably be wrapping the stream pretty soon. Let's see here from Dora Diskin. Are there any special items coming out for the Game Jam? And have you heard of the Game Jam? I think it's something big that I'm actually not aware of, but we've gotten a couple Game Jam questions.
I guess I don't know about it.
Okay. No, the answer is no.
I know a little bit about it in terms of Game Jams in general, but yeah, the answer is still no, that to our knowledge, there's nobody releasing assets specifically for it. It could be a pretty cool, to all of you that are doing game assets as products, Game Jams suddenly become a great way to promote your game products If you know that there's a big game jam happening, be that in Chicago, New York, LA, even in your local community, if it's online, doesn't really matter. Take that as a point of when there's lots of people needing good, high quality game assets. There's a niche to fill.
Yeah. And then this is actually, he thinks it's a stupid question, he or she does. I think it's a great question. Is it all right to utilize the Blender market when your products aren't only made with Blender? I feel like this particularly maybe only relates to models.
Yeah, we actually have products on the site now that utilize multiple softwares. The only key thing is it needs to work 100% in Blender. And that's pretty much the key thing. We have people that sell products with FBX exports, or the textures are done in Substance. Yeah, we already have that now. And, I think that's, something that will even become more common as the industry grows, because everyone's using Substance Painter for the textures because it's amazing at it. The only key thing is when it hits Blender, it needs to work 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense. All right, this can be the last question, I think. This is from Grant Willick. Grant Wilk. What can you recommend to a person looking to sell training courses?
Jay.
Yeah. By the way, Grant, nice to have you here.
Is this?
Yeah,
this is Remington.
Grant, stop by the studio.
Oh, Remington. Oh, hey, what's up, Grant?
I mean, basically, Grant, I would say, some of the things that you're doing on your YouTube channel, those things that are striking a nerve in the positive sense, could probably be a good lead-in. Particularly, one of the areas that doesn't get a lot of training that really would love to have more of is more technical beginner training. There's gazillions of courses on modeling. There's a gazillion courses on animation of varying quality. There's, all of the key topics tend to get covered. But things that don't tend to get covered, are things like the basics of Python scripting, the basics of open shading language, the basics of, understanding nodes. Like nodes still people have no idea how to use when they start out because they're this weird, unintuitive, absolutely non-layer based system that, you've got something over here, you got something over here, and these are all piping together, and then, you get an output. And those kinds of things aren't covered. So particularly like beginner focused technical stuff, but then at the same time, also advanced technical courses. There's maybe like 5 courses out there that are widely available on, Python scripting for artists in Blender. Courses on rigging. There's a lack of rigging training by a long shot. Constraints is another one. Drivers is another one.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd go back to Grant. Obviously, we know you, you know us. You do amazing stuff, but what are you interested in? I think that's, again, kind of key is to, scratch your own itch, like Jay has said before. If I had infinite amount of time, I would do motion graphics training because I know motion graphics. That's what I do. That's what I really enjoy doing it. So I think it's kind of, chances are is if you are a good trainer, which we know you are, if you create something, there's going to be a niche for it, because there's so many of us looking for training in different things that,
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Grant, make training.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, and for one, this is for anybody that's not familiar with Grant's work. Grant has a great YouTube channel. I believe it's called Remington VFX. Grant, feel free to put a link to it in the chat. By all means, promote yourself. Young guy doing awesome technical work in Blender, and it's pretty sweet. But it's also Grant, like the fact that you have this YouTube channel that already has a good following, like suddenly you already have a lot of that springboard needed to start to build that audience that you need for creating products.
Yep.
Leverage that.
Yeah.
And for anybody that isn't yet at that point, but is thinking about it, there's an example of how you can start to build a following that enables you to actually, drive an audience to your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remington Graphics is what it was. Yeah.
There we go.
Yep. So I just don't have the heart to read questions and not have us answer them. Do you guys have a couple more minutes?
Let's do it.
Okay. I think they're good questions too. From Houston G, this may be another stupid question, but it's not. When it comes to using open source software, do you own the rights of the work, or does the license say anything about it?
Unequivocally, yes. You
great.
can, if you want to actually read the specifics on this, the blender.org has a dedicated paragraph or two on exactly this subject. Anything you create in Blender, so far as assets goes, is exclusively belongs to the creator. Obviously where that starts getting a little murkier is if you say, like, if you go to polygon.com and you use textures from that, and then you use those textures on the model that you created, you own the model. You don't necessarily own the textures, but that just comes down to what you use and how you use it. But so far as the Blender side is concerned, what you create in Blender is yours.
So great. All right. Last one. I think we better answer it quick to make sure that's true. What if you want to create courses in another language, training courses? I assume.
Jay?
Unfortunately, right now, the answer is no. Ultimately, what we would love to be able to do is to support, all regions of the Blender community equally, to have a Spanish section, a Chinese section, you name it. Right now, we are too small to be able to even do everything that we would like to do on the English section. And so, since Blender is truly international, it has people from all over the world, particularly like, you come to the Blender conference and there's 20 plus countries represented. And we basically follow the same guideline as the Blender conference does, which is it's not a perfect solution, but English is the most universal language that we have. And so we do everything in English.
Okay. Cool. So I think we can wrap it up there. I don't see any more questions. Thank you guys. It was an extremely active chat. Lots of great questions being asked. I personally love to know that we're answering what you want to know or what you're asking. So a lot of good comments too. Very positive feedback about people not knowing this about the market. So glad you got that info. Thank you, Matthew and Jonathan, for being here. Maybe this warrants another Blender Market talk in the future, but
certainly. Or if anyone's got questions, pop over to the market. And, there's a little speech bubble in the bottom right-hand corner that goes directly to me. So shoot me a question. I'm more than happy to answer your guys' questions. So
sounds good. Hey, and thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for supporting the market, and particularly everybody that's selling on the market, thinking about selling on the market, and we really, really appreciate your time and energy because it's a group effort. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Amen to that. All right.
Thanks.
You guys have a
Thanks,
good
everybody.
one. We'll see you next time.